pass what is stolen onto the next. You give this supposed freedom from fear to a few individuals in this community means you must steal a portion of the First Amendment rights from everyone in your community. Many believe that politics is the art of compromise. Certain political goals may be served in this manner, but compromising the basic moral principles serves the practices.
My name is Allura Lightfoot. I live at 4400 Shumard Court in Orlando, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I oppose this ordinance. I was at the awareness campaign that began this whole process in front of Ms. Tosh's home. This was a peaceful protest on a public sidewalk, and we were exercising our First Amendment rights. We were singing, praying, and holding signs with pictures that exposed the tragic reality of what happens to little babies at the place of business where Ms. Tosh is the CEO, Planned Parenthood. The police who were called said that they had been told that we were using profanity, that we were yelling, and that we were stopping the cars on Aloma Avenue. However, they stated that they had been called under false pretenses because we were not doing any of that. Again, we were just exercising our right to free speech. There are already laws that protect people from threats and violence. We don't need another law. Ronald Reagan said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States when men were free. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Myra Holtzman. I live at 1821 Ansel Avenue. I'm a little nervous, so I've never done this before. But my family and I moved here a year ago from San Diego, and we had lived in, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to Boulder, Colorado, but Winter Park is like the Boulder of Florida. And what I love about it is exactly what you guys have been talking about during this meeting. And when we came here for a house hunting trip, this was our first choice. And when I heard about the family that was harassed at their home, the first thing that came up for me was my mother bear instinct, because I have a daughter that's 3.5 years old, and I was cringing at the idea of having a home that was targeted, peaceful or not, that was, targeting a family. And that's really where I come from today in speaking to you. Excuse me, I'm still nervous. Whew, sorry. Thank you. My daughter plays in our front yard, and she rides her bike, and we take walks all through the neighborhood. And I would hate for, I can deal with it, my husband can deal with it, but I would hate for my daughter to experience any kind of intensity, negativity, anything that in her very young life could, have her question the safety of her world. And again, that's really where I'm coming from. I don't know about the constitutionality of the law. I don't know about a lot of, some things that people have said, but I know that I will fiercely protect my daughter from anything that would put her in harm's way. So I am in support of this ordinance, and I really hope that you guys will vote for that too. So thank you.
Thank you. And I like to think of,
My name is Deanna Waller, and I reside at 2341 El Prado Terrace, Deltona. I oppose this ordinance, and I say this in all humility and birthed out of a love for my Savior Jesus Christ. And with all due respect, Mayor, this was in response to your heinous comment 2 weeks ago. This was written from the article by Jay Rogers on the Forerunner. If the self-proclaimed pro-life members of the City Commission truly believe that showing posters of aborted babies in a public area is heinous and dirty, it begs the question, which is the more heinous and dirty of the following? Is it heinous that unborn children are being killed and dismembered through Planned Parenthood of Greater Orlando's license to do abortion through the end of the second trimester? Is it heinous that according to the Gutmaker Institute, which is Planned Parenthood's research arm, a significant number of women who have an abortion due to an unwanted pregnancy suffer physical and emotional trauma? Is it heinous that Planned Parenthood of Greater Orlando takes in over $1 million a year in income from surgical abortion procedures alone?
I'd like for you to speak to the ordinance before us, please, which we can discuss all of those facts at another time, but what's before us is the ordinance. It's not what Planned Parenthood is or isn't doing. So you could address
right, but
the
I'm
ordinance.
addressing the heinous comment that you used, and I felt like it was unfair and unjust to call us heinous without the proper information. So I just wanted that to be known for public record.
And the heinous part, not that I feel like I need to defend myself, but I think it's inappropriate to call that at anybody's home.
Okay, again, we are called to expose evil as Christians. You know, that is our duty. We are
And
sworn.
that's not what we're here to debate. As a Christian, I would be happy to talk about that with you at another time. We have an ordinance before us that we need to stay on point with. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it.
I understand, sir, and I would just like to say that there is no peace and tranquility with child killing. And that is according to God's laws, which all people will ultimately be
Before
held
I speak
accountable.
again, the activities and the actions that have brought us to this point are material to a point. We're not here to discuss abortion, whether it's good or bad. We're not here to discuss what people do in this community. We're specifically here to discuss an ordinance that we're voting on. So if you can hold your comments to that, I would be very, very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Madeline Potts. I live at 1499 Aloma Avenue. On August 18th, I was 24 hours after surgery. I was trying to sleep, and I was awakened by a commotion right outside my house. My husband went outside to see what it was. The commotion continued, and when he didn't come back in, I went outside because I was worried about him. This is what I saw. The street right in front of my house was lined with protesters. The street across the street was lined with protesters. They had huge banners, posters, very graphic posters. They were shouting scripture. They were waving and yelling to cars. They were confronting people on the street, right in their faces, with their viewpoints. My husband appealed to them to quiet down, which they didn't do until there was a police presence. Also, they brought their children with them. They positioned their young children along Loma Avenue, literally inches from the curb. Aloma Avenue is a busy street, a dangerous street to be walking along, certainly dangerous to be standing along, but it's also a residential street, and it's my street where I've lived for 40 years. I implore you to appreciate how many safe places there are in Winter Park for people to voice their opinions, to exercise their freedom of speech without causing accidents or near accidents, without endangering themselves and their children and the other residents of this community. And I'd like you to imagine how you would feel if you were 24 hours after surgery and this took place in front of your house. How would you feel to have an aggressive stranger confronting your husband or your wife inches from their face, very hostilely? How you would feel to have your child present while someone is calling you names and calling you a murderer? And if you think about these things, I think you'll realize that you have to make this ban permanent. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jay Rogers. I live at 3083 Bloomsbury Drive in Kissimmee, Florida. And I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Especially I'd like to thank Larry Brown for taking about 15 minutes when he wasn't feeling well at the last meeting to explain the ordinance to me. I started to explain the last time that I spoke about the time, a story about the time where I actually lived in such a buffer zone. And that was in Melbourne, Florida. And what happened was I was a resident of Longwood, Florida, and I read in the newspaper and saw on television that there was going to be a resistance by some Christians who were pro-life in a buffer zone in Melbourne, Florida. And I realized that these people were going to be risking arrest. At the time, one of my jobs was as a writer for a newspaper called The Forerunner. I wanted to go and observe it, write an article about it, and to make a long story short, I ended up being one of the 200 people that were arrested. It was a very profound experience. I sat in a holding cell with about several dozen other men. I think in total there were about 200 people over a period of several months that were arrested. I saw grown men, some of them war veterans, some of them senior citizens, in tears, deeply hurt, because they'd lived to see the day when you could be arrested for walking on a sidewalk and holding a sign that said "Choose Life." Now, I realize that there's different versions of what happened on Alone that day. I asked Larry if he would watch a video that I made of it. That's not going to tell you the whole story, because as I know from being a newspaper person, there's always a perspective. But what I want to tell another story about how after several months, I ended up buying a house across the street from that abortion clinic. And I lived there for 7 years. And in that 7 years, I saw a lot. I had a roommate at the time, I was single, and his name was Graham Dugas. We had a mailbox that was actually in the buffer zone because it was across the street next to the abortion clinic. We could be arrested for walking across the street. So my roommate one day decided that he would mail a letter while they were doing abortions. He was arrested, he was brought to jail. Several months later, he defended himself in court successfully. And when it came time for the prosecution to arrest, and he basically just said, I moved to dismiss the case. The judge decided there was no evidence that he violated the buffer zone. Later, he sued the city for false arrest, and they settled with him. All the cases that resulted from that buffer zone arrest after that time were also dismissed. And then eventually the police stopped arresting people. I think you have to be careful what you do, because in my experience from having observed this for several years, sometimes, and the mayor alluded to this last week, sometimes, I didn't appreciate being called heinous, by the way, but one thing you said that I thought was great, and I respect you for
And I
saying
didn't call you heinous, sir.
or our behavior was heinous, excuse me. One thing that you said that I
If you could
respect,
conclude your comments.
I will, is that sometimes you think that something is going to bring peace and tranquility to a city. If it's not principled, it can do the exact opposite. And I think that you should just enforce the laws that you have and take a very serious look at what you're doing tonight, because the city of Winter Park is going to be in the spotlight.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Anderson. I've lived here for 20 years. Now I live at 2020 West Fawcett, 32789. My husband, as some of you know, was a commissioner a few years ago. And my daughter now is 22, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, I'm so thankful that we didn't have to come home to somebody being angry, as they were, with some of the votes that their father had to make, or chose to make." She said to me, when she was in middle school, she was bullied. Have any of you been bullied? She's grown into a beautiful young lady now, but she was bullied and buck teeth or whatever. And she said, "Mom, my only safe spot was my house. That's where I was loved, and that's where I felt like I was okay, and you loved me unconditionally." And the topic isn't pro-choice, pro-life, it doesn't matter. The topic is that we need now, unfortunately, what Orlando's had for a long time, which is an ordinance. We haven't had to worry about it. The whole time my husband was commissioner, we never had picketing. But now we have people. I happened to be there that day, and I do want to say I was there as well. I got my 15 seconds of fame on your video. And they were yelling, and they were chanting until the police came. And they were saying that this particular person was a baby killer. And no one needs to hear that, especially her 3-year-old son. Our homes are a safe place. And I'd like to also say that for those of you, most of you that were speaking that against the ordinance don't live here, but this commission just named a park, Martin Luther King Jr. Park. And just as an aside, sorry Mayor, if you want to change the hearts and minds of people, it's through peace and love, not fear and intimidation. Because trust me, you're not going to change people's minds through the threats of lawsuits and other things you've brought to this commission today. I don't think it's effective. I'd think to yourself, what would Martin Luther King do? Thank you very much, Commissioner.
My name is Michelle Herzog, 5200 Orange Boulevard, Sanford, Florida. I want to thank you. I know that all of you mean well in what you're doing with this ordinance. You know, it's funny, last night I watched a video, the Rosa Parks story. I'm a huge civil rights buff. My hero is Harriet Tubman, if any of you are familiar with Harriet Tubman. She risked running through winter to rescue slaves and bring them to freedom. What we're dealing with right here is a civil rights issue, a free speech issue. I know that maybe the signs were ugly, maybe things that were said, maybe people didn't like, but there was a public sidewalk. And woe unto a nation that takes away the right to free speech. This nation was founded on the blood and sweat of our founding fathers that fought for this right. And I beg and implore you to remember what our founding fathers fought so hard for. When I think about Martin Luther King, you named the park after Martin Luther King. And watching the Rosa Parks story, these people, what they did was considered travesty, but they fought hard for their right to be heard and to have laws changed. And certain people may not like the civil discourse of abortion, but I know that possibly my home could be picketed. But I don't want to take away anybody's right to do that. And I would ask you to think long, hard, and clear, and remember what was fought so hard for here before passing this ordinance and taking away the rights of citizens and allowing your police officers to do the work that they were hired to do. That day there were police officers there. They could have arrested people, but they didn't because there was nothing to arrest them for. So thank you very much.
Reverend Brian Fullwider, pastor for 26 years, 13 of them serving here at First Congregational Church, currently serving at Rollins College as a fellow and president of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. I am here to speak in favor of the ordinance. Mayor, you talked earlier about Buckingham Palace, and I think 730 Park Avenue, where I grew up, not here, but in a little town in California, was maybe 100 square feet smaller than Buckingham Palace. My dad used to say, Pops, who many here know, that, you know, a person's home is sort of their castle. Whether we call it a palace or a castle, is where we find the last refuge in terms of the hard day that we face, the difficulties of life. We find refuge with family and loved ones and in the security of that place that should be sacred space for us and should have a kind of sanctity to it that speaks about what it means to be part of a community and part of a place that protects the safety of its citizens and the well-being of the citizens. It's not just physical well-being that we talk about, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual well-being. All of these we want to inculcate and make part of the fabric, and we do it very well in Winter Park, and I want to encourage us to continue to do that. You have legal eagles that will get you through the proper ordinance making, that will be bulletproof in terms of what the Supreme Court has already upheld in 1988. There are plenty of precedents around for protecting individual citizens in this way, and it is a spiritual enterprise, I believe. We continue to face in a world of great destruction and distraction, the kinds of things that separate and destroy people. Two of my colleagues, an Islamic imam and a rabbi with whom I work on a little radio show here in town, we spend time trying to help people build good relationships. But I can tell you, those two colleagues, I know their stories. I know the ways that they have been harassed. And I want everyone, every citizen, protected in their home and have a safe refuge at the end of the day, whether we call it our palace or our castle, or just our place to be safe and to be at home. And I encourage the support of this ordinance. Thank you to each of you.